Welcome to Creative Tian channel. Today we want to knit a pumpkin on an LK150 knitting machine or any flatbed knitting machine. You don't really need a patterning ability because we are going to hand manipulate some stitches. First, we are going to cast on, and depends on the size of the pumpkin you want to make. You can decide the needle stitch numbers. And for this pattern, I have a multiple of 12. And I'm using this gradient color yarn because I don't really have orange color yarn. And for pumpkin, you don't really need the orange color. Even white color will look nice. I want a total of 48 stitches, and I add 2 stitches, one on each side. So I have needle from left 25 to right 25. I have the carriage tension around 6 and upper tension around 7 for the worsted weight yarn. Now we just thread the yarn and knit across. And then we will just hang some cast on comb. And now we'll return other needles back to the B position, and we can start knitting stockinette stitch. Now we'll just knit a few rows of stockinette. Now I need about 5 rows of plain stitch. I can start to reform the stitch to purl stitches. And to make it easier, I mark the location that I need to reform on the top. I just use washi tape to tape it on the stitches. So I have 4 stitches on each side, and then I have 3 and 3 stitches. That's a cable crossing, and then 6 plain stitches, and then cable stitch, 6 cable stitch, and then 6 plain, 6 cable, 6 plain, 6 cable, and then ending with 4 plain stitches. Now I know my cable stitch. I can reform the stitch next to it to make it into a purl stitch, so the pattern will be more prominent. So that's the location of the purl stitch, and we'll just transform it by dropping off the stitch and latch it up. So this is the first one. Drop off the stitch. I should use the latch up tool here and pick up the last stitch. The last stitch is still on the cast on comb, but we can pick up the stitch next to it. And place it back to the needle. And the next stitch should be 6 stitch over the 7th stitch. The same, drop it and we'll latch it up. And place it back to the needle. And we'll just keep going for all the reforming stitches. So that's after reforming the purl stitch. I have 8 rows first, and then I'm going to do the first cable crossing. The first row looks unfinished, but we are going to tie it up later, so it doesn't matter. To cross the cable, it's very easy. You need a 3-prong transferring tool because we have 3x3 cable. If you have 2x2, you need a 2-prong. And we'll just place the left 3 stitch to the left needle and right 3 stitch to the right needle, and then cross it. Push in. Now the stitches on the needle, the same on the right side. Place it in the hook, pull out, push in, Now the stitch is on right needle, and you can cross either direction. For this project, I will cross it in the same direction. So my right needle will go first to the left needle. And then the left needle goes to the right side. The tricky part is to open the hook first. And it's better when the tension is not too tight. And after you're done transferring, push out those needles. I push out one extra. You can push out more, it's okay. That's just for the next row. You'll be much easier to knit. And we'll do the same with the next section, the 6 needles. Sometimes you need 2 hands to help. It'll be easier. Okay, and then pull out the needle to the D position so you don't drop stitch. And we just continue. We have 2 more to go. Now we finish all the cable crossing. We can keep going, and you can decide how many rows you want before the cable crossing. And I'm going to use 10 rows and refold the stitch and then do the cable crossing. And we just repeat it several times until the last part, and then we'll need the same as the first part. I'll have 8 rows and do the reforming and then take it off the machine. So now we will need 10 more rows. Now I need 10 more rows, and I pick out the stitches I want to reform. Let's start with the 4th stitch and then leave 6 stitches for cable crossing and reform, and then 4 stitch in between, and then 6 stitch in between, and just keep going. So we will reform the stitch and then cross the cable, and then continue knitting the next 10 rows. Now that's all the machine knitting part. I have 1, 2, 3, 4 cable crossing, and the first part and last parts are 8 rows, and there are 3 of the 10 rows in the middle, and you can decide how many of the repeats you want. You will change the size and the proportion, but there's really no rules. And now I'm just going to take it off the machine. I'm going to leave a yarn tail that's long enough so I can sew up the sides and close up the top. Now I thread the yarn, and then I'm going to take it off the machine. I'm just going to go through every stitch and take it off the machine. Now we can look at the right side. You can see all the cables. This is the end that we just threaded, so we'll just pull up tight and close the top to make the top of the pumpkin. Now we'll just seam the sides with the matrix stitch, or you can just use whip stitch to close the sides. Now I seam up the sides, Here is a mattress stitch. It looks small, but it's very flexible, so I can expand it. And I'm going to stuff it with some of the scrape yarn or the scrape fabric I have around. And then it will puff up a little bit more. And then I'm just going to enclose the other side. Now we compress the ball a little bit by stitching through it. It looks more like a pumpkin now. And the only thing left is a stem, and I'm just going to need a few rows of I-cord. And you can decide how big you want the I-cord to be. I pick about 8 stitches. I set up the first lever from the triangle to the dot, and the rest are set for plain knitting. And I'm just going to use simple E-wrap and knit a few rows. I'm just going to cut the yarn, leaving the tail, and thread it with a needle so we can pick up the stitch one by one and tighten it up. After taking it off, just pull it tight. So that's the final product. Thank you for watching, and talk to you next week.